you need your colleague from time to time later, so everyone is a bit nicer, which I think is quite comfortable. And what I believe is that with the changing majorities we have in EU Parliament, it's a great opportunity that if you have strong points, if you have good arguments in the discussion with members of other groups, you can really have success. So, for example, the medical device regulation, which is like one part of the ENVI committee, we really reached a corrigendum, which is especially for German industry very necessary. And so we had a good cooperation also with other groups. So, for example, S&D, they really had a kind of problem in the beginning to decide whether to agree on the corrigendum or not. But we had some good points, and so they came with us. But I also kind of already fell on my face once or twice in the Parliament, especially when it comes to the questions of the Green Deal and when it comes to the terminology of how we want to call it. So, for example, I'm still convinced that calling out a climate emergency is not the right thing. I would have appreciated if we just called it climate urgency, because I don't believe that it makes sense to spread fear and then go for some political actions. I think we should encourage people to join us when it comes to a Green Deal, which is really important for me, and because of that I don't like catastrophe words like emergency. And as a medical doctor myself, I really believe that an emergency is something different. But you know, this is just how Parliament works, and maybe not all decisions I might like, but I have to live with them. When it comes to the Green Deal, many aspects of the Green Deal are still very vague. The most we know is only like headlines and buzzwords. The Green Deal's success depends on a public announcement, but now as politicians we have to go into a proactive role, because if people ask me what do you think about the Green Deal, my answer is it depends. It depends whether I just want to go for to prohibit things, not to allow things, or if maybe we put in the center of our action the opportunities we have with a Green Deal. The Green Deal is the so-called leitmotif and flagship initiative of the von der Leyen Commission, and its goal is to completely transform the whole European economy. It is to conform with the Paris Agreement and the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and especially those goals are very hard affordable for the European Union. But we face some problems as we talk about the Green Deal, and as we talk about climate neutrality for 2050, there are some questions. So, for example, what's the definition of climate neutrality? And I believe, Thomas, for example, that this could be a question a foundation like the Naumann Foundation for Freedom could work on. What is climate neutrality for a continent like Europe? So we have a lot of questions who still have to be answered. In any case, for us, we don't believe that we have to take away things from people like cars or mobility or whatever. What we want to do is we want to go for new technologies, because we see a huge possibility of future that Europe can play a major role when it comes to new technologies. And in my belief, we should approach the problem that we go for a technology neutral solution. So we put different technologies in competition, and maybe the best technology will make its way. Second point is our approach should be not ideological but science-based, and we have very good agencies, European agencies, so our approach must be science-based, and also we want to have a market-driven system. So this is what we as Free Democrats are fighting for in the European Parliament. And to Thomas, I promised it will take me 2 minutes to speak. Now I have already 3. I want to stop here at this point, and I really look forward to the panel discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Andreas, for this fresh and short intro, exactly the way I dreamt of tonight. And thank you for welcoming the big bunch of parliamentarians we have in the room. I will come back to the panel later, but as you have pointed out, we have a lot of people here from the Deutsche Bundestag because they are here together to give input to what is happening here and to learn from what is happening here, as always, in life. So now, before I call on stage the panel, we go through an exercise together. Many of you might know, because this is the Naumann Foundation, we use innovative tools. And what we want to do today is to start with a little poll. And you are going to do this poll. Please take out your smartphones, and Jana Weber will now introduce you to the wonder of Slido.
I don't know who of you has already seen this. Slido is like a participatory tool, which also avoids people hogging the microphone for 15 minutes, which we know in Brussels very well. So I would ask all of you to take out those phones that you have already been looking at for the last 5 minutes and go on slido.com. There you can add the hashtag EGD, European Green Deal, and you already joined the conversation then. As you have already seen, you can ask questions. You can also vote up questions of other people, which will appear here. And so we'll see which questions seem most relevant, which right now none of these seem. We also have a little poll for you in the beginning to set the scene, which my lovely intern will prepare for you. We want to ask all of you. Now, if you're logged in, this question should appear automatically on your phone. It's which of the following policy area is most important for a successful European Green Deal? And you have the choice for 2 of them if you want. You can also just settle on one if you think it's really, really important. We're going to give you like a minute. This might be a hard choice.
Top right, you can see how many votes were already taken.
Yes, so 13 people have already participated. I see slightly
Go ahead.
more than 20 people in this room.
We have more people in the room.
But we can see a trend. Yeah. It's nearly tied between innovative industries and clean energy. Whenever you
Okay.
Okay,
Maybe we simply now welcome our distinguished panel. Please come on the stage and join me. Give them a big applause. They really deserve it. Wherever, maybe the lady in the center.
Sounds a good idea.
Sounds a good idea. Okay. The polls are still open, so take part. 33. I think we can do a 40. Don't you think so? Okay, go ahead. So now here we have our distinguished panel. So much experience on the panel. And I try to give you a short intro from my side. You can read all the bios in the leaflets on your place. But what I want to point out when it comes to Freya Lemcke, the Managing Director of the EU representation of the Association of the German Chambers of Industry and Commerce, is that she is really richly experienced in business representation, and most valuable, I think, for this event today is your global view on the issues. You have been to the United States for a couple of years, and as a representative working for DIHK, you have a close look both on the big players and, of course, on the SMEs, on the small and medium enterprises as well. Welcome, Freya Lemcke. On her right, Garicano, who is not only a member of parliament, of course, but leader of Ciudadanos in Europe, vice president of the economic affairs of Renew Europe, and you are so a seldom animal which compares experience in politics and science. You have been a professor to the London School of Economics, still, as I was told, professor to the EI Business School. You have been to the University of Chicago, and your focus ideas you deal with are on technology, inequality, organization of work, and economic growth. All items, I guess, we can come back in this discussion today. And last but finally not least, here sits a real, rare political animal, special political animal, Michael Theurer, who is experienced in all walks of political life, as a mayor, as a former member of the State Parliament of Baden-Württemberg, as a former member of the European Parliament, and now you are not only member of the German Bundestag, but you had the working group 2 of the Friedrich Naumann Foundation, thank you, of the Free Democrats, and you are deputy chairman of the FDP working group related to all items which, of the whole group exactly, all items related to economy. And so the interesting thing is, I think, is that you have an eye which is not only high-flying, but you are very much experienced on the ground as well. So please, using Slido, take advantage of having such a distinguished panel. We might close now the, yes, we might close it, but can you go back to it for a minute that I can see the results again? And that we can all see the results. Okay, we asked the question, which of the following policy area is most important for a successful European Green Deal? Innovative industries is first, frontrunner, clean energy number 2, and then we have sustainable mobility, sustainable finance, more or less with the same weight, and in the back, green and smart homes. Having that in mind, I want to open the panel with a question to all of you. When you are confronted with the European Green Deal, what are, let's say in a nutshell, your key factors of success and your key risks you want to give to the audience and to the people who are watching us via live stream? Maybe Louis, you give it a start.
Thank you. It's very it's very good to be here among friends. We work together with Andy and with Nicola Beer and with the FDP and with Michael Theurer on all the economic topics, and I look forward to working in all the other topics very closely and very happily in Renew Europe. Let me start with the risks. Of course, the opportunities are many, but let me start with the risks. If you look at what the founding institutions of the European Union is largely an ordoliberal institution, if you want to think about it, with the competition as an independent authority and the central bank, and then all these ideas of budgetary discipline, etc. The risk of the new era, the big risk for the next 4 years in terms of what are the risks, the big risk is that we enter some sort of protectionist anti-market era. So it's not just the exit of the UK, which obviously we are all aware that the UK was the force behind the single market largely. But it is also the fact that with the Green Deal, we are justifying state aid to make the transition. We're justifying potentially weakening all the macroeconomic surveillance procedures, the semester, etc., because we have to also look at climate matters. With the digitalization, we're also weakening potentially state aid. We want champions, it's said. And we're also weakening merger control, which is also a fundamental part of the European level playing field rules. My fear is that if you put all of these things together, state aid comes back, wars between states to see who subsidizes more the industry, to make a green transition, to get batteries, to get etc. etc. We get mergers to get these champions. We get the macroeconomic surveillance kind of weakened. We are going to kind of weaken what makes Europe successful. I mean, I think Europe is successful, first of all, because it is a single market. And as liberals, I think we understand the power of markets to really achieve prosperity. So for me, the big risk is, let's do all this that we're going to be talking about today, but let's make sure that this vocabulary that Andreas was criticizing, emergency, etc., doesn't make us lose the horizon. The horizon is prosperity. The horizon is a Europe that works for all citizens. Advantages, opportunities, many. Okay? So the analogy I would make is, if you destroy all the factories in the country, and you have experience with that recently, you have a huge drop in output, and then you have a lot of economic growth as you recover. If you make obsolete our car industry, our parts industry, etc., obviously that's a big shock for our welfare. That's obviously bad. But the potential is we need a huge amount of investment, private and public, especially private, I would hope, that starts from investment in factories, also in cars, also in homes, all this innovation, all this new source of energy that can power growth. So the trick that we will talk about today is how to make a Green Deal that deals with our risk, that we lose what makes us successful, and captures these opportunities for growth, for jobs, for competitiveness, while obviously achieving the main objective, which is our planet our planet will continue to be livable and humane.
Thank you. Freya, the business perspective more.
Yeah, I think from the view of business, you can always say that the most important thing is actually a comprehensive and thought-through approach to the whole thing. It is not about splitting it down into sectors and just work on one sector, and this is also something that we have already seen from the communication about the Green Deal. It's going to be very comprehensive, and that is both a challenge, a risk, and an opportunity as well. And we always point out it depends on how it is done. We're going to have to see whether people are going to put money where the mouth is. We had big declarations so far, but new targets, fancy statements, are not going to reduce CO2 emissions, are not going to change anything for our doing business, for our economy, for our prosperity and competitiveness. We really have to focus on breaking it down, what can be achieved, what is feasible for companies. It can be disruptive, yes, and that is partly intended as well, but it shouldn't be too disruptive either, because I mean you have gone through this painful experience of really having an economy that had a big external shock and had to come out of it. So we really have to pay attention that we don't create a shock that is too big for our economy to take. Also, if we, and you mentioned the global perspective, for example, if we don't manage to combine growth and sustainability, not only in the economic and social, but also the ecological sense, we're not going to be a model that is going to be copied, and we're not going to have any leading role globally. That is also one of the aims that has been identified as the Green Deal. We cannot say that just because we want it to be a package for growth, as the Commission President has done, the Green Deal is going to be one. We have to work on that. And that we can only achieve by really paying attention to good regulation, a thorough impact assessment, and always bearing in mind what actually our structure of the economy is. And for example, I'm coming from Germany, we have a very strong structure of SMEs, small and medium-sized enterprises. We have a lot of challenges already handling normal day-to-day business because they have limited resources. So for every kind of regulation, we also have to do this SME test and see what actually does it mean for companies that are smaller and don't have a whole compliance department, don't have the financial means to pay for certifications that are going to come. We really have to see what can we do to support these companies and how can we make it tangible for them. I mean, Andreas Glück already mentioned these medical devices regulation, for example. We had a huge problem with that, and 1/3 of our companies active in Germany in the medical devices industry said they have to close down shop because of this new regulation, just because it was badly done. I mean, it was not the purpose of the regulation that was bad, it was just the way it's implemented. Not enough time for certification, not enough competent certification bodies, etc., etc. And just because of that, 1/3 of the whole industry is at risk. So that's a very real risk. And people sometimes think, they can just handle a little bit more bureaucracy. They cannot. It's a matter of to be or not to be. And this is something we have to bear in mind when we define what this Green Deal, that is still very vague, as you also mentioned, when we define what it is going to be and how we're going to implement these targets that we're talking about.
Thank you so much for this broad insight. Michael.
Yeah, thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank Friedrich Naumann Foundation for making it possible that we have this discussion. I'm here as a head of delegation of now 6 colleagues from the German Bundestag, and we informed us closely at the Commission. We had an exchange of view yesterday with the Commissioner Freya and Commissioner Schmidt, and also with Johannes Hahn, and we will meet Commissioner Gentiloni this afternoon to discuss especially the Green Deal and what we want to secure is jobs and wealth in the European Union, because we would not win anything if we would create a framework, a political framework in the European Union which is driving the industry out of the continent. There is no German warming and there is no European warming, there is global warming. And if we would, for instance, destroy the industrial basis, if we would destroy steel production, car production, and would then import products from other countries with the same or even a higher CO2 footprint, there would be no any advantage for the climate, but on the other hand there would be a loss of jobs and of wealth in the European Union. From that point of view, I really believe what I said recently in a discussion on a panel with a representative of the Fridays for Future movement. The discussion was how radical must climate policy be? And my answer was we have to be even more radical as we are, but we should be more radical in innovation, because we believe that the impact of the European Union could be much bigger if we provide the world technologies with which we can save the climate. And from that point of view, the biggest question, and Luis and you mentioned it, is what is the political economic framework to achieve it? And if we look at the instruments, we think that the European Union at the moment is or has implemented one instrument which is very successful, and that is the emission trading system. It was not successful in the beginning, to be honest. We had to change it. I was those days member of parliament with a backloading. But if we now look at the reduction targets and where we achieve the reduction targets, those sectors who are integrated into the emission trading system, they achieve the reduction target in all member states and in the European Union as total. Where we are not achieving it, that is agriculture, transportation, and heating and cooling, these are the sectors not integrated in the emission trading system, and therefore we are here to advocate in favor of an enlarging of the emission trading system. And two last remarks on that point. Yesterday we had the opportunity to discuss it with Bruno Le Maire and the Finnish economic minister Kari Kulmuni on the Renew Europe caucus. That is the level playing field and the global approach. I think it makes sense even to enlarge or to incorporate or to make the offer to the African Union states, to Africa, to integrate in the European emission trading system, because then we would have a very big incentive and leverage to build up technologies in Africa, where we have a very good surrounding for renewables, wind and photovoltaic. And then we also could enter into what we would call a European Hydrogen Union. For FDP in Bundestag, I proposed to found a European Hydrogen Union because we urgently need renewable hydrogen to decarbonize industrial processes, but also to produce F-cell and e-fuels technology. And we believe that a competitive production of this hydrogen is not only possible in the Northern European countries, but there is a much bigger potential in Southern European countries like in Spain, Greece, but also Bulgaria. And there is an even bigger potential in other countries around the world, for instance, North Africa, but also South America or Kazakhstan or even Australia. And if we can produce with a 2 € production cost of renewable electricity, hydrogen, then it is easy to produce methane or e-fuels, which can still be used in the technology we already have in planes, but also in cars. And we have 1.3 billion cars around the world, not billion, trillions. Trillion cars around the world, so a ban of cars, as we know, in Europe alone will not solve the climate problem. But if we could make these 1.3 trillion cars climate neutral or partly climate neutral in the next 10 years via e-fuels, we would make a big step forward globally, and we believe these are only some technologies we should foster.
Thank you for your ideas. All of you touched upon the issue of internationalization of the problem, of course. We are not living alone on this planet, and it's not, as you mentioned, Michael, a German warming or a European warming, but a global warming. So what I want to ask again, all of you, is with regard to the global perspective, in regard to one of our keywords this afternoon, competitiveness. What will be the reaction of the United States or of China towards the initiative of the European Green Deal? Why should they care? And what is our answer to the questions of carbon leakage and other things? So you are eager to answer that.
Yes, yes. I wanted to just first make a very little remark that affects this and everything else, which is what you said, Andreas said about the quality of regulation. So I'm very scared of how we are proceeding at a very fast pace, very breakneck pace in this area, putting targets without really doing any assessment of impact or any assessment of the quality. And I think this is something that our party should be leading in Parliament, in national parliaments, in European Parliament. When we are trying to set up a rule, we have to make sure that the rule actually makes sense and not discover later that this rule has, for example, killed all the car industry. That is too late once the industry is there. International and carbon leakage. Everybody understands the issue, and you mentioned it, and it's pretty clear. Like if you put, and the African Union example is very clear. If you take an aluminum industry in Avilés, north of Spain, they have electricity from historically from coal, and they had aluminum, they had steel. You'd close it because it's all contaminating. And you put it in Morocco, then you have achieved nothing against climate change. You've destroyed lots of employment. So this is a disaster for you. If you close it because of climate issues. Okay, so what can we do? I think that what the Commission put on the table, it was actually put by Nordhaus in his Nobel Prize speech on the table, and what everybody is now thinking about is a huge new idea that can be a big new idea of 5 years. It's obviously the carbon adjustment mechanism. carbon adjustment, previously called carbon adjustment tax. It's not just a question of words, as we will discuss. I mean, this is something that will deal with competitiveness issues and will deal with the climate as a global problem. I think it's something that we need to embrace and we need to help shape. The idea is very simple. It's like, okay, if you're going to pay some price for CO2 production, for carbon production in Europe, you cannot just take your plant and have the same CO2 pollution and then take it in the European Union, which leaves the planet badly off and Europe worse off. So what's the solution? The solution is a carbon adjustment in frontier. When you bring the product in, you pay, let's be careful here, you pay what you would have paid if you had produced in Europe. Okay? We want to make it WTO compliant. We don't want it to be a protectionist measure. So you want it to be really related to climate. As you know, there's an exception. I have the text here in the WTO that says tariffs that are aimed at protecting the population, health, animals, plants, or natural resources. But we don't want the tariff, okay? There are three ways to do it. One, which is my preferred one, which goes in the direction Michael was saying before, which is extending the ETS system. We extend the ETS system, we tell the Chinese company, well, you want to trade in, you've got to buy your ETS credits like if you had produced in Europe. Problem with that is you need to get the footprint of the product, how much carbon is in the product, and very importantly, you need to get, to avoid these WTO charges and this tariff aspect, you need to make sure that you take into account the possibility that they have participated in ATS before, but they have already bought credits, or they have already paid the tax for carbon. So if they have already paid the carbon tax, they should be able to exclude it. As you're hearing it, you already realize the administrative complexity of this is gigantic. And of course, we don't want all this paperwork in the border. So the Commission really has no idea if this is feasible. A second possibility is simple tax. You have a tax that you have the product, you have the footprint, and you charge all the product at the border for the footprint. Problem is, again, that does sound like a tariff. It could be WTO compliant because it's for health and environmental reasons, but it's very much tariff. I'm less in favor of this. Third possibility the Commission is considering is an excise duty, where you consider the footprint of the product and you apply a tax everywhere, inside and outside. Again, that's a race of taxes, and I think it's inferior. So the right way to do it, I think, is by using the ATS system, which is the one that is market-based. I think the idea of extending the ATS system, which I hadn't heard before when I had it to Michal yesterday, is extremely interesting and very innovative and could potentially revolutionize the way we're thinking about this, and I really look forward to hearing and reading more about how it could be implemented. But I think this is the key mechanism to deal with the competitiveness issues and to deal with the global aspect of global warming.
Before we go on with the panel, I simply want to encourage you to make use of Slido. We have the first question. Don't be shy, just type it in. I will try to
no
build it.
Or,
of course not. We are
jokes are
the beacon of civil dialogue, civilized dialogue. Okay. We try to then to put this question in. They will appear on the screen. But now we go on first with you, Marta.
Yeah, I would like to comment on the idea of this border adjustment tax. It was called in former times, now it's called mechanism or measure. Sounds easier for some people in Europe. It was an idea of President Emmanuel Macron, and there are very well-renowned economists like Professor Felbermayr from Kiel who are advocating that idea. So as FDP group in opposition in Germany, we are investigating. I think that is not working.
What's going on? This one?
Yeah, that was energy saving.
Batteries, old technology.
As FDP group in opposition in Germany, we are investigating that idea very closely. We are really keen to learn more about details. I think it really depends on the details. The devil is in the detail, we know that. And anybody who have once visited big harbors like in Rotterdam, Antwerp, or in Hamburg, they know where the problems are. We already have a problem to control the containers. So there will be a control and documentation challenge. okay, we can solve that perhaps with digitalization. But in Germany, for instance, the Deutsche Bahn is doing something really crazy. They are allocating their renewable electricity to the ICE trains. So if you go for a long distance, you are climate neutral. But it is done by the energy mix. So if you are commuting a smaller distance, you have a worse climate footprint, the CO2 footprint. So nothing is won for the climate. And our biggest fear is that, for instance, an export nation like China is allocating the climate neutral renewable electricity to export factories so that they can give a climate neutral green certificate to that export industry, and then we will end up in a big trouble. So we have to answer these questions, because it would make no sense if the European industries have to document all these things and others find perhaps ways to circumvent. So we have to have global standards, and that is leading me back to the most important thing. I think the major leverage to achieve progress in climate is to set a framework in the European Union where we are economic efficiently and where we are ecologically efficiently and effective. And we should reduce the burden for those who are working in the economy and in the industry, and we should help and foster technology and innovation, because I believe that we not only need Fridays for future, we need freedom for future, and we need especially future by technology. I believe the answer is technology, and we should concentrate in Europe on that thing, because we can influence that in Europe. And with this question, we are not dependent on the goodwill of other trading nations like China or the United States. And if I look on Trump, I'm not so optimistic that President Trump will be in the forefront of a worldwide Green Deal. But perhaps he will convince me of the opposite.
I'm not going to endeavor in that, actually. I just came back from the States where I lived and worked at our rep office in Washington, D.C. And I mean, as you know, the Trump administration very successfully rolled back all the climate and environmental laws that the Obama administration introduced. So they are definitely not at the forefront and not a partner in this. As far as we can see now, I mean, of course, there are always some states at state level that are advancing, where we also had good discussions about what kind of technology they have, how we can work together with, you know, like German engineering and then Silicon Valley technologies, etc., etc. So there are partners over there. The discussions are there as well. But overall, of course, our discussions about the Green Deal here in Europe are regarded as something that is also very difficult for international relations. I had meetings with several ambassadors of big companies, of big countries here where we have a lot of companies that are active. So they said, okay, we want more European investment. But on the other hand, you always try to convince us to be more open as economies. But now, with the Green Deal, you have developed your own protectionist agenda as Europe. And this is not the reputation we want to have, and this is not the aim we want to pursue with this Green Deal. So we have to be really careful about how we design this Green Deal and how it's regarded by our partners abroad. Is it just protectionism, or do we want to lead an example that can be followed? And then I'm again at the point where I started. What does it do to competitiveness? And is, for example, a carbon border adjustment something that convinces anybody to follow us? No? Or is it just seen as twisting arms and you know, just jumping up and down there like you have to follow us by this? I mean, is it really attractive? Is this the way we want to go? The question also about WTO compliance is something that we take very seriously at DIHK. I also agree that public policy exemption, Article 10 of the GATT is probably not the way to go, because it would be very, very hard to argue for that. Other things we have, or other mechanisms that we also have discussed, we have to see really what is feasible. If you talk about emission trading system, I mean, we're talking about broadening the European emission trading system to new sectors. We're discussing how we can assure really a coherence between national systems and the European system. So talking about like bringing the whole world together is very ambitious. We have to see that. I mean, it's not something that we can say is going to work tomorrow. And who are our partners in this? How can we get them on board in this? Of course, global carbon prices and global level playing field would be ideal in this scenario. But how do we get there? And what is really feasible also through enabling companies being a partner in all this. This is for me still a very big question mark, where to start this and how can we really design it in a way that we as societies but also as individual companies can really handle it.
Very good, Freya. This perfectly fits into my next round of questions, and we can take the top-rated Slido question together with it. Which countries, there it says, should take the lead in implementing, driving the European Green Deal, and why? This brings me to the question of the stakeholders. We have various stakeholders in this business. It's about politicians on various levels. We have some here. It's about citizens, of course, you and me, on our day-to-day behavior. It's about companies, it's about the civil society as such. What do you see as the factor? What kind of public mindset do we need to make all that work with regard to have, in the end, still a Europe with prosperity and jobs? And if someone of you is free to answer the question, which countries should take the lead in implementing, driving the European Green Deal, and why? Michael, you have experience on all levels.
Yeah, thank you very much. The first thing I believe that we should not focus on countries, because the country I know best is doing a really isolated approach in energy policy, and that is very expensive and is not helping the climate. So what does it help to close down some coal mills, to coal power stations, if you then have to import electricity from nuclear power stations in France or from coal power stations in Poland? I cannot see any advantage out of that, but and there is no climate effect, because the climate effect is resulting if you buy the certificates in the European emission trading system, and they don't do that. So that is a very risky and a very expensive isolationist approach, and from that point of view, I really believe that the right way is a European framework. We have a European common market, and we need a European common climate strategy, and we should overcome all these nationalist approach in the member states. And then it is completely irrelevant where the CO2 reduction is achieved. It should be achieved there where it is efficient, because otherwise we would waste resources which we urgently need to invest in innovation, in new technologies, or in social stability. So from that point of view, I really believe that the framework approach we are following as Free Democrats and as Renew Europe is the right approach.
But don't we need some political leadership to make things happen, and don't look 26 European member states on Germany, how the Energiewende is going, for example?
We have a report by the German Court of Auditors. Those who know me remember that I was the chairperson of the Cont committee here, working closely together with the Court of Auditors in Luxembourg. And the report of the German Court of Auditors proved that the energy policy, Energiewende, was in Germany more expensive and less effective than in other European member states. So the German approach cannot be a blueprint for the European policy. Otherwise, we should learn in Germany from other countries in Europe who did the job better and who saved money for their societies. And from that point of view, The biggest fear I'm confronted with at the moment is that we will face a huge carbon leakage problem. If you travel to Strasbourg, you have in directly neighborhood on the other side of the Rhine, Kehl. There you can visit a medium-sized steel production firm. I did that, and the owner showed me that at the moment energy costs are double as high as labor costs, and if energy costs will rise, then he will go bankrupt, and then we import steel from other parts of the world. And as far as I'm informed at the moment, the steel we import from India or from China has not a better carbon footprint. So that would be the silliest thing we could do, but it's not only steel. We have so many other industries, and that is these are not German industries. You know, the well-known German car industry is not a German car industry because 40% of the value chain of a so-called German car comes from European neighbor states. So each so-called German car is a European car, and from that point of view, I really believe it is not a question of member states. It's really a question of the European common market.
Thank you, Michael. Freya, speaking of companies, are the European or the German companies ready for innovation?
Always, if they have also the regulatory framework to be able to be innovative, and that's always the question that we also have against this background. What we of course put obligations on companies. They are part of the Green Deal. They are part of the climate protection goals that we have so far. They always have been. A lot of them are very ambitious themselves, also declared now that they are going to be climate neutral before 2050, for example, as individual companies. They have been investing massively. We have very good engineers and ideas. But then often they find an environment that also hampers their activities and also the implementing innovative ideas. For example, if companies say we want to produce our own clean energy through renewables like PV there are still regulations hindering them from this and making use, for example, also of the internal market in energy trading, energy selling and getting it to the places where they need that. So we have still obstacles in the regulation that not only prevent innovation, but also then really reaping the potential that the European market has. And I fully agree with what has been said, that it cannot be the obligation of one member state to lead on this. It's a European Green Deal, so we are all in this together. It cannot be only one country, and it cannot only be one part of society. So first we have to do our homework and also look at what our European framework is. For example, the internal market, where is it working, where is it not working, especially also when it comes to energy. Then the other regulations for innovation, then the other tools fostering innovation in a very targeted way that helps with the Green Deal, but then also reducing the burden on companies to be a partner that they do want to be. And as I said, we have a whole list of examples where we can say companies would like to do more, but simply cannot because of the regulations we have in place. And then, of course, we still have to see also what is within the competence of the member states and what is within the competence of the European Union. Sit down together and really work systematically on that.
Very much food to think about, I guess. But Louis, with you together, I want to bring in Slido again. I think there are two questions, the two top questions which you are well prepared to answer. When it comes to H2 in Africa, efficient, energy-wise, unstable, risky, or in Europe, less efficient, money intensive, creating jobs and growth. Which way to go with regard to this industry? And again, as the way I understand the next question is on the carbon border adjustment mechanism. You touched upon that, but maybe you have some deeper insight to
Yes.
share.
I mean, I would say about the linking of the US ETS with global carbon pricing. That was the interpretation I wanted to give of the CBAM. Right? My interpretation of the carbon border adjustment mechanism was precisely trying to extend the ETS mechanism to lead other countries to adopt and to follow and to avoid carbon leakage, to adopt our carbon practices, let's say. And I think something that is very clear from what Michael is saying, what we all three are saying, is that we have never been at big risk of shooting ourselves in the foot, right? We are worried about European laws of competitiveness, and then we're going to come up with this humongous set of rules, regulations, and paperwork and taxes that could be extremely damaging to jobs in Europe. And even worse, that's why it's a complete shot in the foot, even worse, might not do anything for the planet if all they get is the industries to move away, like this steel plant next to Strasbourg. So it's this whole game is international. I don't think there's much for one country to do. It's even difficult for Europe to make much of a difference because we are a small share of the global emissions, and they are growing in Africa, India, and China. And the whole game is about how much change can we lead or force the other countries to do. And my view is that ETS is probably the best way to do it. That's what I would say.
When it comes to the Africa-Europe assessment, do you have any, coming from Spain, have a closer look to Africa maybe?
No, I mean, it's obvious that I mean, I think the view that Michael expressed is a really extremely insightful view, right? If you think about how much carbon, how much coal plants, oil plants, gas plants with very old technology inherited from China or from Germany or from Spain moving to Nigeria or wherever it is, how much of that is going to be installed there, and how much pollution is going to be, how much CO2 is going to be, how many emissions are going to be coming in there. I think Africa is really a very good project for Europe. We could link migration, climate, international development aid, and this idea of extending the ETS and really do something huge. So as to where do we invest, I think that's a technology question that I would not be able to analyze.
Michael has something to add. Please, go ahead.
Yeah, we in our working group analyzed some studies looking on the renewable energy potential we have in the world. There are huge potentials, wind potentials in Scotland, in Norway. There are huge photovoltaic potentials, not only in North Africa, but also in Southern Europe. And if we look, for instance, on the Eurozone, we are discussing about a macroeconomic stabilization. If we really take some of the money we need to stabilize the euro and build up with them production capacities for hydrogen or to produce photovoltaic electricity, that would be a very good investment. And yes, indeed, we need water. But if you have a really efficient photovoltaic with 2 euro cent production costs per kilowatt hour, then you have enough energy to have a desalting process, and then the water problem can be solved. I think we should put more energy in developing such bigger strategy, a bigger framework, and not only look on the own village town.
Yes, I buy that one.
I was very intrigued by the I was very intrigued by the link between macro and clean energy, and I look forward to thinking more about that. I think there's an idea to be developed in Europe and the member states.
Okay, taking advantage of you two politicians here on the panel and bringing in the third question of Slido, will the EU be able to reach its own goal, being climate neutral by 2050 with EGD? And do you agree with the timeline given by the European Commission, 2030 to 2050? What about the governance in aligning member states to these targets? I want you to comment on these two questions, and maybe in line with a third idea I want to put into this mindset. That is, has the European Green Deal the potential to blow up the European Union with regard to all the cost which may be bared in the just transition mechanism and all the differences we have between East and West, North and South? So are we on the right track? Do we have the mechanisms, the political ones? Are we strong enough? Or is it just an exercise on the edge?
In Germany, for instance, there is that study of the German BDI, the Industries Association, and that made it very clear, yes, the reduction goal of Paris, minus 85%, can be achieved. 95% will be very costly and could perhaps not be achieved. But even if you achieve 85%, you need around 2 billion euros money for compensation or to bring investments over the rentability threshold. And if we look at that, I think there should be no money wasted. So the major question is, how can we be as efficient in public administration and in all political sectors so that we really can have this money needed to get the job done? And I think if we look at Germany, if a country like Germany with a budget surplus has these problems, I believe that even in other member states with bigger fiscal restraints, the challenge is even greater. So from that point of view, it will be a huge challenge to do it, but I still believe it is possible, but only if we get economy and ecology together. These are two sides of the same medal.
And can we get our friends from Poland on board?
Yeah, why not? Why not? I think that our neighbors in Poland, like other citizens in the member states, they really want to have job opportunities. They want to have wealth and growth opportunities. And the biggest question is to think it holistic, not only to reduce CO2 emissions, but to combine it with a strategy that is helping to secure wealth and jobs.
Luis, please, with the perspective maybe of a country, you come from Spain, which has undergone a lot of reform in the last years.
Well, I mean, the transition is going to be very hard on Spain, and the money for the transition is scarce for Spain. The just transition mechanism allocates 4% of the money to Spain, way below GDP. You know, the mechanism is determined by number of jobs in the coal industry and amount of peat produced, amount of gas or oil. And somehow Spain did the whole closing of the coal mines over the last 20 years, and now there are not a lot of jobs in coal mining. So Spain is going to get 6 euros per person, I think a couple of 100 million from the Just Transition Fund. So in terms of compensation for the climate change and how to make the transition smooth and so on, it's going to be hard for Spain. It will be a difficult period. Spain doesn't have the electrical plants. The electrical power plants for the cars. The actual. We don't have the factory. Volkswagen, for example, doesn't have any platform for electrical cars in Spain. So it's going to be a hard time for Spain because there's not a lot of money to invest, public money. There won't be European money. It has to obviously be private money, but it's going to be difficult. I think it's going to be a difficult decision.
Okay. I love the next question on our Slido panel about the consumer behavior. Should not politics do more to change consumer behavior? And can we go on with the same consumption habits? A tough question for a liberal. You mentioned Fridays for Future. So Michael, you raised your hand. You are first.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm skeptical about that because if I speak to citizens, not only in my country but all around Europe, I didn't find anybody who bought an SUV, for instance, because that person wanted to damage the climate. Nobody walks into a trader and says, I would like to buy an SUV because I want to damage the climate. There are other reasons. There are other reasons, mobility reasons, safety reasons, comfortable traveling reasons. And the major question is not to come with an interventionist, dirigistic approach telling people what they should do or what they should not do, because that will be the end of an open liberal society. So if somebody doesn't want to take the car, that's fine for me. Yeah? If somebody takes the public transport, we have to look whether public transport is really undergoing with a smaller climate CO2 footprint, because that is not for sure everywhere. And if somebody doesn't want to move, because that would be the most energy efficient way, not to move at all, then that is fine for me also. But I believe that the only way to achieve climate neutrality is to offer the consumers the same comfortability, the same offers, the same options for mobility, but climate neutral. So the question is not to drive them, to push them, to force them in a kind of ecological dictatorship into another behavior, but to develop technologies which make it possible that people can live as they want to without damaging the climate, because the people are not willingly damaging the climate. It is a side effect, and they would be happy if they have the opportunity not to do it. And the last example is, for instance, why do people not buy hydrogen and use FSOL, climate neutral cars? Because you cannot buy it at the petrol station. And we have 50 petrol stations where you can buy hydrogen in Germany only. We need 1,000 or we need 2,000. And the biggest question is, what shall the consumer do if you have an FSOL car and you don't have the opportunity to tank hydrogen because there is a lack of petrol stations? So the political framework must be like that the companies who offer petrol stations offer the right products, so that the consumer has a real choice to behave climate neutral, and then you will find people who will even be willing to pay for that a higher price. I'm very sure about it.
Good idea from my perspective. I don't want to pressure your political ideas, of course, but changing consumer behavior means new markets. So companies can profit from that, right?
That's indeed an argument we are discussing a lot, but usually the other way around, that you cannot oblige companies to do something for which there is no market. When consumer behavior evolves, companies adapt and follow that. That's of course because otherwise they cannot survive. Companies innovate to survive. They invest to survive. And this is also a comment I sometimes get in the background, against the background of this Green Deal. Like, I mean, of course, it's going to be expensive for you for following these new targets, etc. But it's in the very nature of companies to invest, of course. But what companies need is predictability. And if we change targets and regulations every year, every 2 years, this predictability is not there. So we need a certain planning that also reflects consumer behavior, of course, because if by law you try to oblige somebody to produce something where you don't have the market yet, not going to work. The other way around, it's not going to work either. So it has to go hand in hand, of course, and this is also why I think all of us said there are big opportunities coming along with this Green Deal as well. And I think the whole idea behind that, we need a transformation that affects the whole society and our way of thinking and living, each of one of us, you know, and also the way we do business. Then eventually, that is a discussion that cannot be denied. I think the question is, what is the time frame? What is the approach? How much is going to be done? How quickly and through which tools and instruments? Because I mean, we don't start discussing this today, and this Green Deal is not the first legislation that is, or package of legislation, probably so far we only have a communication, that is binding companies and society to fulfill ambitious climate goals. I mean, companies have been investing over the last couple of years massively, but massively. And if we talk about the goals that we currently have, we are far from secure to achieve this, despite all the investment we have done. So we cannot forget this. So saying always more and more and more, as I said, it has to be coherent, going hand in hand with regulation, the possibility of really handling it, and the market that also supports this, because otherwise if the market doesn't support it, companies are going to close down shop.
Louis, please.
I don't know if you want me to comment on the heating in the climate context. I'm very hot. Not climate-friendly heating. So
you're perfectly right.
So no, I don't have much to add. I agree with Michael. I think that those who preach and those who try to talk to consumers as if they're children and try to explain them what they should be doing make a mistake. I mean, consumers are adults and they have to make their own choices and they have to choose what they want, obviously, and we have to let them choose and not preach to them. And I think that part of what populism is profiting from is the fact that many voters feel like they are being told whether right or wrong, and they want politicians to solve problems, not to look down on them and tell them what they should be doing. And I think that's in that respect, I'm very much in agreement with Michael's view on that.
This does not really surprise me, but that is part of our today's message, of course. Thank you perfectly for this insight. I know that some of you have constraints on your further timetable, so tonight we not only this afternoon we not only had a very good couple, but we had a very good people here in the room as well, a very good audience, which took advantage of the Slido system. It was an educational exercise as well. So I really won't pick now a question from the public. Next time when you come to the foundation and you have not been heard with your question, use Slido, please. So I have a final question now from my side to the panel, and this goes simply like this. If you would be forced to translate the European Green Deal into 3 concrete measures, what would you use? What is the top 3 success key factors you have in mind? Who starts? Michael, as always.
Yeah, first of all, enlarging the European emissions trading system to the other sectors, and then incorporating other parts of the world as an offer. Second, the foundation of a European Hydrogen Union. We have good examples like the European Community for Coal and Steel and Euratom. So we have all already experienced cooperation in energy fields. And the third one is to put down all the obstacles for the connection of sectors. Because we still have a lot of obstacles, for instance, to produce hydrogen with renewable electricity which is not used. And from that point of view, I really believe these were 3 measures, and of course innovation. We should use more money for innovation. So these are 4 pillars.
Okay, who's next? Freya.
Yeah, if you ask me for like 3 measures in this context of climate, because I mean we talked about the Green Deal, and there's a whole a lot about this link to circular economy, chemicals, environment, etc., etc. But we haven't touched upon that. Yeah, zero pollution ambitions for water or air, whatever. So we haven't touched upon that. So I'm going to stay in this context of climate policy. So I think the first demand we would, the first measure we would support is re-globalizing the EU's climate policy, because a domestic-only approach doesn't work. Also for the measures that count, for example, for for our CO2 emissions. Also, then the second, coming from the same reasoning, is really creating a global level playing field through a global carbon price, because otherwise, as I said, through other measures that we also discussed briefly, it's not going to work. And then third, empower companies to source cost-competitive renewable energy, because this is really, from the German perspective, a real issue. Companies want to do more there, but they cannot that so far. And so this, I think, if I had to choose only three, it's those.
So I was going to I'll start with that, because that was going to be my third point, which is the energy union. Spain, for example, has very bad intercommunication with France in electricity. The amount of capacity that we have between France and Spain is limited. And that happens in other countries. We have local electricity markets still largely, and of course, with a very big variability of the supply of renewable energy, it would really make a huge difference if we can interconnect, because the variability of many countries together is much lower than of one separate. And then the other two have also to do with market mechanisms, the ETS, expanding the ETS, and utilizing the carbon border adjustment mechanism to globalize this fight. I think the internationalization of the fight against climate is the key. If we don't have that, we're really going to kill European innovations. We're finishing. I want to thank the foundation and you all for being here, and I want to profit to ask you and the foundation for help as well. And I'm sure the rest agree with me, the rest of the politicians agree with me. The biggest risk here is very, very fast action. Somebody was saying here, is there a threat in starting without really not knowing what we're going to do? And I think there is a big threat. I mean, we put a target, somebody says, oh, by 2050, and then the next time we discuss this, 2050 will be the old thing. Somebody will start with 2040. It's like, yeah, 2040, 2040. And nobody has really thought what 2040 means. And then it will be 2030, right? What I'm trying to say is this is very important, but we need, like in every other thing in life, sorry, there are costs and there are benefits. There's no free lunch. And what we need to help from someone like the foundation and from all of you is those transition costs, that good regulation we talked about, that the rules, like Andreas said with the devices, that the rules are produced, promulgated, taking into account the effects. The effects that are expected and the unintended consequences are understood before we proceed in this race and we kill the European industry.
That is not what we want to do. Very good. Give the panel the applause it deserves. Thank you so much, the three of you. Thank you so much, Andreas Glück, for setting the scene. Thank you for your usage of Slido. See you soon in this theater or somewhere else. You would do us a very great favor if you make use of the QR code on the back of your leaflets to give us some feedback. We need that to be scrutinized by our donors, so please feel free to give us whatever we deserve. Okay, thanks again and seeing you soon. Bye.